Hi, this is Chris Mazzara, certified holistic nutritionist and author of Food, Love, and the Tariff Diet. And what I'm going to show you quickly is why restricting yourself from your favorite foods never works for weight loss. So the first thing that you have to understand is that the area of food has three areas. There is a biochemical component, there's an emotional component, and there's a psychological component of food. And all the diets that are out there, all the successful diets from the past 50 years, they've all been focused on what biochemical combination or recipe is best for weight loss, whether it's vegan or vegetarian or carnivore, Atkins, South Beach, whatever it is. They're just talking about the types of food that you should be eating, when you should be eating them, but they're not talking about the emotional and the psychological components of the area of food, which is why so many people fail on their diets. So when you have a 99% failure rate in anything, you know that something's wrong. And this is what's wrong. The base of all successful dieting is that people have to be happy. They genuinely have to love the food that they're eating. And if they don't, it's not going to work out. So the emotional and the psychological are the base for any successful dieting, because you have to be happy and actually look forward to the food that you're going to eat. And if you don't, in the short run, you can lose weight with any diet that's out there. They all work. But in the long run, they don't work because people are not happy with having to give up their favorite foods. If they do a vegan or vegetarian diet and they don't want to give up eating meat, then that becomes a problem. If they go into more of a carnivore, paleo, keto direction, and they don't feel like having steak for breakfast and giving up pasta and things like that, then that's only going to work in the short run. And the next important thing that you have to understand is that there are two types of people when it comes to weight loss. The first group of people, they have to restrict themselves from their favorite foods. Their relationship with food is so incredibly toxic that they can't ever have any of their childhood or teenage or favorite foods from their 20s, because if they go there, they can't stop. And there are people that I know that weighed well over 400 pounds and now they're in like the 160 range, and they can't go into fast food places because they know their addiction to food is so incredibly strong that if they go there again, it's going to throw all of their work and everything that they've gained out the window. That's about 20 to 30% of dieters. And group two, these are people like me that can't handle restricting themselves from their favorite foods. People can deal with that for a month to 3 months. Sometimes if they're trying to lose weight before going to a wedding or going to the beach in the summer or going on vacation, whatever this short-term goal is, pretty much any diet will work. And people can emotionally and psychologically handle restricting themselves from their favorite foods for a short period of time. But why it doesn't work past a month, past the 3-month mark, definitely never past the 6-month mark, is that their favorite foods and the foods that they grew up loving, they can't be without this food for too long. And it gets really frustrating because they'll go on a diet, they'll have some success, and they'll lose weight, and then they'll have like one of their favorite foods that they haven't had in a while. They're like, oh my God, because that emotional and psychological attachment to that food is so strong. As soon as they have that food once, they don't want to live without that food anymore, then they end up putting on weight. So let me show you how that looks. If you're tired of diets that force you to give up your favorite foods in order to lose weight, only to put all that weight back on once you quit that diet, then I invite you to try my completely free online program that will help you lose your first 10 to 15 pounds without giving up the foods that you love. So head on over to foodloveonline.com and get started with us today. No credit card is needed. This is a completely free online program. Even if you're incredibly busy or incredibly lazy and nothing else has worked for you in the past, this can work for you. In 3 short videos, I will take you by the hand and get you on the road to losing weight, and most importantly, happily keeping it off forever. So head over to foodloveonline.com and I'll see you over there. So let's just say this is where a person is starting out, and this is how much weight they ideally want to lose. So what happens is a person will go on a diet. Doesn't really matter what diet it is. They all pretty much work. And let's just say that over here on this side, this is like a 2-year mark. Okay. So usually how this works is a person will start to lose weight. They never end up losing the total amount of weight that they're targeting. And this is kind of a generalization, but I've seen this so many times, and this is probably going to be familiar to you as well. So let's just say they're trying to lose 40 pounds and they get to around the 20-pound mark, and they're starting to feel better, they're starting to look better, but they've been restricting themselves from their favorite foods for a while. And what happens is, let's just say that this is a couple months in, then they'll start to have their favorite food again. The wedding is over, the summer is over, that short-term goal isn't there anymore as a motivator, and emotionally and psychologically they can't handle being restricted, so they end up putting the weight back on. And if it takes a month or two for the weight to come off, maybe they go back and forth with having that previous diet where they were losing weight, but eventually that weight's going to go back on again. And then as soon as they realize, oh my God, I'm back to my original weight, well, here the new diet starts again, and they start to lose weight, usually based around a short-term goal, and then that weight's going to go back on again. Sometimes what happens is that these moments become really, really frustrating for people when they've realized that they're back at that initial weight that they've started at. And what happens is, when this happens time and time again, it starts to wear on a person emotionally and psychologically, where sometimes that weight goes beyond where they originally started at the beginning of their diet adventure, because emotionally and psychologically people just get fed up and they're just like, I can't do this. Like, yes, I can lose weight, but I can't deal with not having rice or pasta or whatever the thing is that they're restricting themselves from. They'll continue this process, and you can see the amount of weight that they've lost, even though that they're at a higher weight than when they started. The amount of weight that they lost is the same, but they're going from where they say they're starting at 200 pounds and they're trying to get down to 160. Now they're starting at 220, and if they lose the 40 pounds, they're only at 180 again. So even when they're dieting and they're losing a bunch of weight, they're still heavier than where they were before. And a lot of people call this ping pong dieting, just going back and forth, but this is really not healthy, not only on the biochemical and the biological, but also and definitely in the emotional and the psychological, where there's going to be a point where a person is going to give up. They're going to throw in the towel, and the weight is either going to stay in this range or it's going to keep going up. And that's why they say most people that start out on a diet 2 years down the road end up being heavier than where they first started. And this is why, because they're not taking into consideration the emotional and the psychological, which is the base. Getting back to this initial thing, if you don't have this set, and if you're not emotionally and psychologically happy with what you're doing, not content, you actually have to be psyched with the type of food that you're eating and the way that you're eating and how you're losing weight. This is the base. There are a lot of different biochemical methods to lose weight, but you have to find something emotionally and psychologically that works. And that's what my book Food Love is all about. We focus primarily on the emotional and psychological because we have to form that base, and then we can get to the biochemical. I'll teach you all the different ways that a person can lose weight, but we have to base that around the foods that you love and your favorite foods, and you can't restrict yourself in that process. So the solution is that we have to use our favorite foods. For the 70 and 80% of people that go on diets and can't handle being restricted from their favorite foods, we actually have to use our favorite foods as gateways and guides in how to permanently lose weight. Because what we want to do, this is what permanent weight loss looks like. This is what we want to do. So if we're starting out here and we start off by eating our favorite foods, maybe you've been restricting yourself from your favorite foods. So maybe even in the beginning, we end up putting on a little bit of weight as you're adjusting to this new way of eating. And that's fine. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take off a little bit of weight. And what I explain in my book, in Food Love, is that weight loss, permanent weight loss, looks like an unhealthy stock chart. So what's gonna happen is that we're going to lose weight, and then life happens. You might go on vacation. Between Thanksgiving and the Super Bowl is a natural time where people eat differently and people can put on weight, but it's not going to be that big of a deal because you know how to take off weight, because you know how to use your favorite foods in order to lose weight. If you start naturally putting on weight, which happens sometimes in the winter months, especially if people live in a colder climate, you're naturally going to be craving heavier foods. That's fine and that's natural. So if you end up putting on a little bit, that's fine. And then you start losing weight again. And this is healthy weight loss. These things here, in the book, I call them upticks. These things tend to mess with people because what happens is when you start putting on weight again, people start saying, oh, this isn't working, whatever. And then they can't get back on track in a way that allows for the weight loss to continue. But because I explain all of this and explain that all of this is natural, when you know that something's coming, when you know that it is impossible to lose weight just like this for permanent weight loss, nobody does anything in a straight line. Like that's not possible. That's not life. There's going to be emotional times, celebratory times when you're going to be eating a little bit differently, emotional times where you're going to be sad or it's a challenging part of life. At that point, you're going to be eating differently, and that's fine. That's normal. So as you're losing weight, and in the book I call this a descension, eventually you're going to get down to your ideal weight. And then once we get down to our ideal weight, what's normal for most people, this is called maintenance. Within a year, we're going to go up between 5 to 10 pounds. You'll have that much variation in a year, but it doesn't matter. Like, you're never going to hit your ideal weight and be able to stay there. Like, that's not possible. You're naturally going to put on 5 pounds. It can be for hormonal reasons or seasonal reasons or emotional reasons, psychological reasons, a variety of reasons. And then ideally what we want to do over time is that a lot of people start with like a 15-pound swing where they'll be about 15 pounds within a year that a person their weight will vary. And then where we ideally want to get to is we want to shrink that to 12 pounds. And most people can do about a 10-pound swing. It depends on what your natural ideal weight is. If your natural ideal weight is 100 pounds, then you might have like a 5 to 10 pound swing. Or if it's 150 or 200 pounds, then a 10 to 15 pound swing during a year is fine. But once we've lost the weight, maintaining and staying in that zone and understanding that naturally I'm going to put on weight at different times, and that's fine because I know how to take it off. It doesn't matter if I end up putting on a couple of pounds. So we have to use our favorite foods as gateways and as guides. And the quickest way to learn how to do that, pick up my book, and you can check out this next video where we're going to go into more details of how you use your favorite foods in order to lose weight consistently, okay?